And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Today, we're going to talk about industrialization and the government's roles in that. Meaning, industrialization didn't always seem like a great idea to every country. And so we're going to kind of see what those effects are. The countries that did embrace it, what happened to them, and the countries that didn't embrace it and what ultimately happened to them. So let's go ahead and begin. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire, they're going to fail to adopt these Western technologies, Enlightenment ideas. We're going to call that modernize. So we're just going to Western technology and Enlightenment ideas, we're just going to make one term called modernize their country. And they're going to fail to do it, or they're going to just fail to do it in any kind of rapid way where it becomes relevant. One of the reasons is because we have mass corruption that led to rapid decline and ethnic nationalism with the heavily diverse populations. Remember, the Ottoman Empire conquered a lot of land around them, and a lot of land around them, which would be modern-day Turkey. So around them, places like the Balkan regions, like Greece and Serbia, these people over here, they're going to be like, look, we're not Ottoman. We're not Turks. We're Serbians and we're Greeks. And they're going to kind of create a strong sense of nationalism once again. And because the Ottoman Empire is getting a little weaker because they are not modernizing and all the other countries of Western Europe are starting to overtake them in production, that these other countries are going to see the weakened state of the Ottoman Empire and they're going to start breaking away, and that's going to be known as Balkanization, which you'll learn in around World War I. So by the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire will be known as the sick man of Europe, which isn't a flattering term, really. But they're going to call him the sick man because he's a man, he's fully grown, he's got a lot of land, but he's just so ineffectual. People are going to start picking off land from him, especially Russia is going to sort of take advantage of the weakened state and start, conquering some land from them to improve their own empire. And again, the Ottoman Empire is just, they're really not going to be able to do anything substantial to show that, to hit them back. Okay, so we're going to talk about an individual in Egypt. His name is Muhammad Ali. So one place that the Ottoman Empire ruled was Egypt, but it was only in name. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, yeah, they technically did have control of Egypt to a degree, but Muhammad Ali, when he rose to power in Egypt, he was selected by the local leaders and not by the Sultan. So the people supported him in Egypt, and he did pretty much what he wanted to. And the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire really had very little power to say no and to try to stop it. Muhammad Ali, he would fight with the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire only if it really benefited him. But other than that, if the Ottoman Empire went to go fight and he didn't want to fight, he didn't. And so it really is, Egypt is really emerging to be its own sort of entity and break away, again, another country breaking away from the Ottoman Empire at this point. So Muhammad Ali began reforms in Egypt, and those reforms allowed it to become more just Western European. They started mimicking the military, their ways of commerce and factory work and production. He's going to have state control of businesses and land, which is going to give him a lot of revenue in the government to make these very drastic changes. He built textile factories to compete with France and Britain. And if you remember, like, Egyptian cotton was a really big thing, like in the 1600s, it was a big brand. People wanted it a lot. But now with all these other faster ways of production, they were sort of getting left in the dust. So Muhammad Ali had the good sense to industrialize or modernize things. He changed their way of life, even some of their laws, and then he is now changing their way of production. He even built a navy so that he could sort of compete with the Western Europeans. Okay, so China. China is going to be a little bit like the Ottomans here. The Qing dynasty is going to fail to modernize or see the necessary need for it until it's too late. They'll modernize China later in the 1900s with Mao Zedong, but right now the Qing dynasty is sort of behind the times here, and people are starting to pass them up. As a result, they're going to suffer some two humiliating defeats by the hands of Western Europe. The first one is going to be the Opium Wars. And the Opium Wars, we're going to talk about it later on as well, but Opium Wars is basically the British wanted to sell opium, which is a drug, to the Chinese people and was making lots of money, and eventually the Chinese government said, stop it, you're hurting our people, leave us alone. That's not something we want in our country. It's affecting our people in significant ways, and it's hurting us. And the British said, screw you, we're still going to sell it because we're making lots of money. There was a war. Actually, there were two wars. But anyway, with that, the British won, decisively won that war. And as a result, the rest of Western Europe started creating what's called spheres of influence, where they started just picking off areas of China. So if you look at this map here, you can see the spheres of influence. So the green represents Britain. So Britain basically claimed all these areas in the green and said, this is our sphere of influence. No other country can compete with us here, and we might even be able to enact our own laws on commerce and stuff. And the Qing dynasty just sort of had to roll over and say, okay, fine. And so as you can see, we have China just slowly starting to get kind of carved up, if you will, by Western Europe because they failed to modernize and become significant in pushing back the Western influence that was constantly coming at them. Next. All right, let's talk about Japan. So the rest of the webcast, we're going to talk about Japan here because Japan does something that China doesn't do. So let's talk about this. So between 1600 to 1853 or so, Japan interacted very little with the outside world, adopting a foreign policy of isolationism. Now remember, isolationism is where you sort of don't go out and trade with other people. You just sort of stay within yourself. People want to trade with you, that might be okay, but you're just sort of sticking to yourself and focusing on your country, and no desire to really interact with others or see what they're doing and try to, change. So the ever-increasing influence of Western Europe was permeating the East and Southeast Asia, and China was seeing this. With all these influences from Western Europe, they were starting to see how they were sort of dominating these cultures, and some of these cultures was kind of losing their way of life and losing their identity and becoming too westernized. So many countries wanted to use Japan from Western Europe. They wanted to use Japan as a fueling station for going between China and other nearby countries, but China sort of tried to repel them and say, we're not interested. Until this man right here, Commodore Matthew Perry. So this dude, who's from the U.S., okay, he sailed into in Tokyo Bay, and he basically demanded that Japan trade with the United States, and since they had superior firepower, fast and swift steamboat engines that had heavy guns, Japan just sort of gave in to that demand, said, okay, fine. So Commodore Matthew Perry sort of strong arms them into trading with the United States, and they just sort of say, fine, we see you have technology that we can only dream of right now. So Japan did not want to lose their culture like they saw other areas of Eastern and Southeastern Asia. So what did they choose to do? They chose to modernize. And one of the reasons was to protect their way of life. protect who they were as Japanese. So one of the first things Japanese did was they overthrew the Tokugawa shogunate. And they said goodbye to that old feudal system. And they restored the power back to the emperor in 1868. And this event is known as the Meiji Restoration. So, the Japanese invited Europeans and Americans to Japan. They wanted to learn about their institutions, their technologies. They wanted to learn about their ways of government and their philosophies, because they really wanted to try to understand who are these people and what is it about their civilization that we could really try to improve upon. So there's going to be some changes that come to Japan as a result. They're going to sort of try and just pick and choose what they want that they think is going to benefit them. So they're not going to just adopt every aspect of Western civilization, but they're going to choose the parts that they probably admire the most, and they're going to go from there. And all these different reforms that's going to come is going to be known from and found in the Charter Oath, which was created by Emperor Meiji, and it was a blueprint to just help modernize Japan. So the first one is they abolished feudalism in 1868. No more feudalism. It's an old way of thinking. There's better ways, basically. They established a constitutional monarchy, very similar to like Prussia. They had the idea of equality under the law, where, just because you're rich and powerful doesn't mean that the laws don't apply to you. So everyone was equal under the law. They abolished cruel punishments. They built armies, navies, institutions, or instituted conscription for military. So conscription for military is just a fancy word to say the draft. So many countries, even today, if they go to war, the government has the power to sort of draft or make young men, in essence, go ahead and fight for the country. And the young men really don't get a say in that. You have a new school system to expand educational opportunities. So now they're improving their educational system. They built roads and railroads. They the government subsidized industrialization in areas like tea, silk, weaponry, shipbuilding, sake, which is a very popular like rice wine kind of drink. And so Japan is doing what the Ottoman Empire and China sort of failed or even refused to do. They are going to modernize, and because of that, it's going to have a significant impact on their influence in the Eastern Asian and Southeastern Asian region. So like Britain, the Japanese also suffered from problems with industrial society. For example, female Japanese factory workers suffered similar abuses as the British women did decades earlier. So you're seeing similar abuses and situations in British and in Japan just a few decades later. Japan will have the strongest military in East Asia as a result of all this. Military might and Japan's need for raw materials will eventually lead to the first Sino-Japanese War in 1894 and even the Russo-Japanese War in 1904, because they will seek to get out of Japan, conquer lands outside of Japan, because again, if you're doing industrialization and factory work, the number one thing that you absolutely must have is raw materials. And sometimes your country doesn't always have the raw materials you need, and sometimes you don't want to strip your country of your raw materials and you prefer stripping another country of them instead. So as you can see, so just to sum up, China, Ottoman Empire, failed to industrialize and is going to become more and more irrelevant and more taken advantage of by other countries that did industrialize. And in this case, in this webcast, we have Egypt with Muhammad Ali, who chooses to industrialize, and Japan, who industrialized and modernized in a very significant way. And that's it. So go ahead and write your one-page summary, and we'll see you later.